is exactly right. I should be proving the non-existence of God. Just as Dr. Craig, since if he buys his own view of the burden of proof, should be proving the non-existence of Vishnu and Allah, and etc., etc. Well, we don't hear anything about those. So I'm not convinced that Dr. Craig even believes his own view of the burden of proof. Now let me go into some of the things that he was saying about what I was suggesting. We've seen the whole argument about God's knowledge and what God can be expected to know. Dr. Craig insists that it's only propositional knowledge, things that can be true or false, that God is obliged to know. Now, I'd have to suggest that if that is, as he says, the theologian's view, there is one motivation for that view, and that is that it escapes this concern. Now, take a look at what I've offered you as suggestions for pieces of knowledge that we have and that perhaps God ought to be obliged to have. Well, what do you think? Is it genuine knowledge or is it not? I'd have to suggest it is. It's part of how we get around as knowing beings in our world. Now, Dr. Craig also suggests that God may well have morally sufficient reasons for allowing the evil that we see around us. Now, that's a curious remark because, you know, I thought the problem of evil was actually that we don't know God's reasons for allowing evil. And Dr. Craig is simply stating that they might be out there somewhere, but that's just the problem repackaged as if it's a solution, and it's not. Let me try taking a look at some of Dr. Craig's arguments in rebuttal there. By the way, in an opening speech, nobody criticizes arguments, so that's why I wasn't criticizing his arguments. That's just how the debate works. Let's take a look at the cosmological argument. Well, we're starting from the idea of a necessary existence, and Dr. Craig's first premise reads, everything that exists has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause. Now, I think I'd want to call begging the question on that premise, because postulating a necessary existence is very close to actually postulating God in the first place. So essentially, in his premises, he's already put God into the picture, and if you can then derive a conclusion that God exists, well, that's no surprise. Now, I also have to go on and point out something about his intelligent minds. He insists that this creator must be personal, an intelligent mind. Well, what do you know about minds? Well, I'd have to suggest to you that you know them only from the terms you see around you. You only know minds that are instantiated in space and time. They're embodied in our bodies. So if now we're going to start talking about disembodied minds, well, I'd like to see some proof. Before that can work as an explanation of anything, I'd like to see some proof that there is such a thing. Now maybe Dr. Craig is defending dualism, which is a philosophical view that there is a mind as some kind of different thing from a physical body. That view, since Dr. Craig knows of a lot of views that nobody holds anymore, well, dualism is a view that no one holds anymore. It's fundamentally incoherent. How exactly does a non-spatial substance interact with a spatial substance? Well, it doesn't. So our minds must be physical one way or another. Now let's consider his next argument, the cosmological argument, the one that starts with everything that begins to exist has a cause. Now he suggested that the atheist is obliged to think that the universe must pop into existence out of nothing. But that's a straw man of anything any atheist thinks. Because, well, in the first place, there are complex questions in there that cosmologists need to be answering. And atheists are kind of dependent on cosmologists' knowledge. Now, well, what do the cosmologists have to say about this? Are they quite as definitive as Dr. Craig in saying that the universe has an absolute beginning in time? Well, I should point out, an absolute beginning is actually a metaphysical idea. Nothing a scientist could possibly demonstrate that that exists. Furthermore, quantum mechanics suggests that there is no such thing as empty space. In fact, empty space is, well, a staging area for spontaneous particle and antiparticle creation. They pop into existence. Now, I'd also want to go on and point out that the singularity, the idea of the singularity is what's being called the Big Bang here. The idea of the singularity is simply where our theories about things break down. In other words, that's where we have to throw up our hands and say we don't know. Now, Dr. Craig thinks it's acceptable to simply stuff God into that gap and say, here's an explanation. Well, I'm not skeptical. Honestly, I think a better position to take would be, say, with the cosmologists, we actually don't know what's going on there. And I think that's a good deal better than trying to explain things by God, because God is currently an unknown. God is an unknown, and if you're trying to explain things by the unknown, that gets things dead backwards. We usually explain things from the known to the unknown. But here, Dr. Craig's explaining the known by the unknown, and that's just backwards. The fine-tuning argument. This is quite an amazing one. I don't know how design gets onto the list of options. Remember, we've got some options: physical necessity, chance, and design. Well, what do we know about design exactly? Well, in the first place, it's always done by human beings. We only know of instances of design that are done by human beings. So our experience with that, it would indicate that whatever design is taking place is within a human context. Now I want to, lost train of thought. Yeah, so I guess the point I was just making was that it seems unlikely that design genuinely belongs on that list in the first place. Now, Dr. Craig has gone on to suggest that it's incomprehensibly low odds that the universe could appear as it does, requiring all those constants to be exactly as they needed to be. Well, incomprehensibility is not a property of chances, it's a property of minds. And all someone is saying is that they don't comprehend these odds. But I think Dr. Craig actually does comprehend those odds. He talks about how they're calculated, and he talks about how big they are. So that's simply not the case. Now, I think also, finally, the atheist can accept everything he said pretty much in the fine-tuning argument, because, you know, all it's saying is that on one assumption, the probabilities of the universe appearing exactly as we see it are greater. And that's the supposition that there is a fine-tuning creator God out there somewhere. And well, yes, of course, if there was one of those, then the odds are much better that the universe was created by one of those things. Just as if there really are poltergeists, then those funny noises my house makes at night could well be more likely caused by poltergeists. Big deal. Now, the moral argument really sticks in my craw, I gotta tell you. In the first place, this premise, if God does not exist, objective values and duties do not exist, pagan question begging. This already connects morality and religion, and that is exactly what's in question. Is morality independent of religion, or is it not? Dr. Craig simply assumes it is and goes from there. Well, once again, the conclusion cannot be that surprising. He also talks about animals having no morals. And I'd have to suggest to you, here's an experiential conclusion I've come to. Fact number one, we're animals. Jared Diamond suggests we're the third species of chimpanzee, and this is not even disputable. We share all kinds of physiological similarities. We share DNA with all the living things on the face of the earth. So it's indisputable that we're animals. Second, we have morals. We behave morally, we think about morals, we reason about morals, and all that sort of thing. So I'd suggest to you that given that it's not disputable that we're animals, and it's not disputable that we're moral, I'd have to suggest to you that, in fact, there is at least one animal that is moral. All of the other things, like whether or not there's more to us than animals, than being simply animals, whether or not there's this funny spiritual stuff spouting out of our heads or wherever it comes out, whether or not God is responsible for the moral structure of the universe, all of these are much less certain than the fact that we're animals and we're moral. So in your experience, that should be your conclusion. Now really, I really honestly can't say too much about, I'm not a theologian, I'm not a biblical scholar, so I don't have too much to say about his argument that the resurrection is somehow proved by history, except that that better be pretty good history, because if you're proving miracles by history, wow, what kind of evidence could you possibly need? Well, I don't know. I don't think that, given that history very often makes it difficult to figure out what people did on any given day or what they thought about anything, or etc., I'm a little skeptical that miracles are genuinely provable by historical documents. And finally, I'm awfully glad that Dr. Craig admitted that that last argument from personal experience was not an argument. That spares me the trouble of doing that. But I'd also like to point out one thing, this idea that those who listen find God. Well, that's essentially saying that if you will find the evidence acceptable when you accept the evidence. That's circular reasoning again. I still have time left, but I'm running out of further things to say. Well, yeah. I don't know, this idea that those with open hearts find God, that's a really odd idea, because it's basically just the you'll believe it when you see it argument that we got from all of the New Age people for the last 20 years. And it's no better here. Somebody who's saying that is only saying, well, since you don't believe in the God I do, you must be a bad person. You must not have an open heart. Well, that's no kind of evidence, that's no kind of argument at all. I guess I better quit, since 30 seconds isn't much time to think of anything else to say.